Joining us now, Ann Tracy. She's from Arizona. She spent a lot of time on mind-altering drugs. Not that she takes them, obviously, but she spent a lot of time on it in her career. And we had another shooting in Thousand Oaks and another mental disorder. And Ann Tracy, you've been working on this for a long time, and one of your theses is that a lot of prescription drugs are mind-altering, and they lead to mental illness. You want to elaborate on that and how that might tie into some of these horrible shootings that we keep having?
It's pretty simple math, John. All you have to do, everyone's heard how wonderful this serotonin is and how they all need to increase it in their brain because that's going to make them feel better. It's a lie. One of the biggest lies we've ever been told in medicine. What you want to increase is your ability to metabolize that, which lowers the level. And I've been trying for almost 30 years to say, hey, you made a big mistake in this hypothesis because guess what serotonin does? LSD and PCP produce hallucinations by acting like serotonin in the brain, by actually increasing serotonin in the brain. Mm-hmm. So what you're doing in metabolizing, the whole metabolism of serotonin is messed up by antidepressants. They inhibit the metabolism of serotonin so that you very gradually go into those same emotions that you would get by taking LSD or PCP. And that is backed up by medical research. So what we're seeing, in fact, if you go, I've got one whole chapter in my book on these drugs that compares what people on PCP describe as their to people on antidepressants, and word for word, it's identical. It's scary to know this stuff. Would you be the least bit surprised to find out that the shooter down in Thousand Oaks was on PCP?
No, tell us about that, Ann.
You know, there's not an officer on the planet that would believe that drug was on the market for 7 years, and we were told it had a large margin of safety in humans. You find me a police officer anywhere today that will agree that there's anything safe about PCP. Mm-hmm. It produces more violence than just about any drug we've ever seen.
So, Ann Tracy, is it your thesis here that some of these shootings, Las Vegas and the hate crime, the anti-Semitic shooting, I'm not sure that had to do with a drug. That guy was just out of his mind. And he's
could be because they become obsessed with anything to do with Nazi.
So
I have no idea why. Even children do. They'll cut swastikas in their stomach.
But what does this have to do with serotonin? And serotonin, so everybody knows that the typical thing you take would be those antidepressants, right? Like Paxil.
Right.
There's like five.
There are other drugs as well, but mainly the antidepressants.
Yeah, and it's what are the big ones? Paxil. Give me three of them.
Prozac, Zoloft.
Right, Zoloft.
Alexa.
Yeah, so you take those for antidepressant, but what you're saying is they can alter your mind and you start hallucinating. Right. And your thesis here is that the ease with which doctors subscribe this stuff can be contributing to the violence in America that we've experienced in the past decade. Is that your thesis?
Exactly. I've been tracking the cases for 30 years. We've got 5,000 of these mass shootings, school shootings. I was the expert in Columbine. We've known all this time that these drugs are very closely related, but you go to court, they put gag orders on the families in order to get settlements. Mm-hmm. So nobody ever finds out. I know the judge over the first really big shooting that we had, which was a workplace violence one, he caught wind that they had stopped and made a settlement in the middle of the court case, the wrongful death cases. Mm-hmm. And so he spent the next 2 years finding out that there actually was a settlement of at least $50 million in the middle of the case, and he changed that from a settlement to, it wasn't a settlement. They'd actually found that Prozac was the cause. So this is being kept from the public, and that's what he said. This is a public safety issue, and it needs to be open to the public. We need to know when one of these shootings happened, what drug was that person on? Was it one of these mind-altering drugs that we know produces violence? We've got medical research showing scientists found a group of mice that had been genetically altered, and it was an experiment that went wrong in what it was they were trying to do, but they noticed that these mice were the most violent creatures they had ever seen.
The mice.
And so they started looking at that and found that what had happened is they lacked the gene that helps them to metabolize serotonin.
Really?
And that their brains had high levels of serotonin. Mm-hmm. And they said that's where this violence was coming from.
From the mice.
And we're giving this to people nationwide to increase the serotonin that produces the violence. And then we say, gee, where's all this coming from?
That's interesting. And the study they did on the mice, and Tracy, that you're talking about, because bottom line is, if you ever dealt with a mouse in your house running around, like we all have, they're a pretty passive little rodent, right? They're not like rats that are a little more aggressive. I mean, they just want to get away from you and go hide under something and, eat a fly or whatever it is that they eat. So if they did this and they were aggressive, it's a little bit something else. It's not like the rat problem we have here in Washington, D.C., where these rats are as big as my cat Sammy, and they walk around the middle of the street like they own the damn place. And they'll just pass you by and what's up, dude? Just keep walking by. So
no, the initial researcher on serotonin found that it would make even rabbits, the most docile of creatures, become very aggressive.
So why hasn't this gotten because here's basically what you've been saying with this violence. You've been saying that this is a national emergency and it's getting worse, that you're saying that they blame guns, they blame the NRA, they blame the Second Amendment, they blame veterans, they blame Republicans, they blame Trump. But what you're really saying is the real culprit here, if you trace it down to its origin, is government-approved prescription mind-altering drugs that are prescribed with ease, and that you get off them, that has an effect. You get back on them, you take them with alcohol, you combine them with other medication, and you got a problem.
Or you give it to somebody with a head injury, and you've got a problem.
Right.
I really wonder about Donald Trump Jr.'s friend who just committed suicide. Jason Hairston.
Yep.
His hunting buddy, he had terrible head injuries and shows all the signs of them putting him on an antidepressant, which could easily have produced his suicide last month.
Well, what is the solution, Ann Blake-Tracy? What do we do?
First of all, we educate ourselves so that we know what's going on. At this point, the largest users of these drugs are Christian women.
Really?
Yes.
No way.
So we've got all these mothers on these drugs who are exposing their children even in the womb. I'm very, very concerned about what we're beginning to see with these children that have grown up with an inability to metabolize serotonin. I mean, we've got 10-year-olds shooting their grandmothers. Another 10-year-old that just stomped a baby's head to kill it. It's just, we've never heard of these things. I've had cases where a little boy on Paxil, only 7 years old, wanted to cut the baby out of his mom's belly. So it's got to stop. The people need to be weaned very, very gradually down off of these drugs, though, because we've got a video on our website. If you go to drugawareness.org and search Why I Took a Gun to School. This is the only school shooter to ever speak out. Mm-hmm. And he He explains exactly what happened to him, and they were switching him from one antidepressant to another. This was a good kid.
All right, in a minute,
he was getting his Eagle Scout award,
and in a minute,
getting ready to serve a mission for his church. He takes a gun to school and holds his classmates at gunpoint for 45 minutes. To this day, he remembers none of it. But luckily, someone was able to talk him into handing him the gun. It's the only reason all those kids didn't get shot. We got to learn to wean these people very, very slowly down off of these drugs, because they produce something called a REM sleep disorder, where you can actually, in a sleep state, act out the nightmare that you're having. Like the young minister there in North Carolina that killed his wife, woke up and called 911, and he said, "Oh my gosh, my wife's dead on the floor. There's blood all over." He said, "I think I did it." And that's the same thing that happened in comedian Phil Hartman's case. I was expert in that case, where his wife shot him and then herself. She suffered that REM sleep disorder. She was writing a screenplay about a woman that shoots her husband in her sleep. So what did she act out? She was hysterical when she found out it was real and not a nightmare.
Well, I'm glad you're on, and we're going to have you back, because this is all about public awareness. And the next time I have you on, I do want you to walk us through that video. I was going to ask you to do that a little bit earlier, but we're out of time right now. I want to thank Ann Blake-Tracy for being with us, and I think she's onto something. A lot of the violence in the U.S. can get traced back to these mood-altering drugs, and I kind of agree with you. When you got 7 and 8, 9-year-olds on, Paxil, something's the matter here. And I got to go. John Fredericks Radio Network.